Welcome, everyone. I'd first like to start by acknowledging we're meeting on the traditional and unceded territories of the Sechelt Nation. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Committee of the Whole meeting for Wednesday, December 22nd. It is now 3:01, and I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting and ask if there's any declaration of conflicts. Perfect, thank you. So can I get a motion to adopt the agenda? Moved, seconded, all in favor? Excellent, thank you. We have no appointments and delegations, no new business, so we'll move right on to business items. Item 5.1, short-term rental recommendation review. And I would like a motion to receive that report, please. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Okay, perfect, thank you. And I will turn it over to Director of Planning, Andrew Allen, first.
Great, thank you, Chair Huster. So as folks from Committee of the Whole recall, we are back for a second delegation here with EcoPlan International. We have Odette Pinho and Catherine Levitt joining us again. They were here 2 weeks ago. So 2 weeks ago was very informative for us, using both the Mentimeter and some of the verbal feedback we received, informative for us on how to take next steps. And so today we'll be looking at getting down into a little bit more specificity. There's just a couple of questions on the Mentimeter and a presentation that we will run you through. Fundamentally, what we're proposing today or indicating today are some potential regulations, as well as seeking direction on next steps in terms of engagement and so forth and timelines. So at this point, I will happily pass over to Odette, and she'll lead you through presentation, and we will go from there. And there'll be time for discussion as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and pleasure to be here, committee members and council. Pleasure to be here. My colleague, Catherine, is going to be sharing a slideshow, and I'll just give a bit of an orientation to that. First, I'll present an overview and a context for short-term rental regulations and a management approach. I'd like to review next slide, please. I'd like to take time to present what we heard on December 8th and give an overview of the priorities that we heard from committee members. And that'll be pretty brief, just 5 slides, but I wanted to take a time to review that, as it gives a really good foundation for the proposed regulations. Second, I'd like to respond to 4 questions that were asked during the last meeting about short-term rentals tools. And they're really, they give an important basis and a foundation for the main course of the presentation, which is presenting proposed short-term rental regulations program for the District of Sechelt. And I'll pause in a couple of times to check with committee members during the presentation, and just to see if there's any questions, comments, and also to check on desired next steps. So on December 8th, the committee heard that the District of Sechelt currently lands more on the permissive side of short-term rental regulations. And when compared with other communities in terms of regulations, monitoring, and compliance, and even with the low requirements that exist today, that the compliance rate is less than 50%. And so the District of Sechelt currently manages enforcement on a complaints basis if there are issues that arise. And there's not many issues that arise, but when they do, it's uncommon compared to other communities that they tend to be more proactive in their enforcement. And it's understood that the regulations today in the District of Sechelt have been in place since 2005. And a lot's changed in 16 years. It's been, especially with short-term rentals in the past 5 years, it's time for the District of Sechelt to look at an updated short-term rental management approach. And that's what we're discussing today and presenting today. And so at the last committee meeting, committee members were asked to rate their priorities and to support the development of coherent regulations. And the model for understanding trade-offs was developed by Third Space Planning, and they developed a toolkit for Canadian municipalities that identified 7 key trade-offs, 3 of which are shown here, that local governments end up making and addressing either implicitly or explicitly. And by making trade-offs explicit and asking council to be very clear about their priorities, it helps to more easily clarify and prioritize regulatory goals. And the trade-offs in regulating short-term rentals, they range on this scale of the spectrum from generally more restrictive approaches that are shown on the left to permissive approaches on the right. So let's talk about the results from the last meeting, the Committee of the Whole on December 8th. And when asked, committee members showed a preference for more restrictive regulatory approaches on the slide shown here that are aimed at preventing housing loss, encouraging long-term rentals and commercial guest accommodations, and supporting proactive monitoring and compliance systems. So this graphic shows where committee members indicated the alignment in their priorities, and the number on the scale shows the responses, the number of responses where they weighted. And so that's toward a more restrictive approach. And then in the next area, the priorities were less clear, and committee members were split in their responses on priorities for where they landed on preferences around availability of long-term rentals, home ownership affordability, and the management of neighborhood disturbances and where that management responsibility should lie. And so it's okay to leave them less clear and maybe just as is, because the next slide gave us a good idea of where committee members ranked their overall priority objectives. And there seemed to be good consistency in supporting a coherent regulatory framework that has desired outcomes of encouraging neighborhood fit, protection of long-term rental supply, promoting business and regulatory equity, and then the others down the line. But this gave us an opportunity to really say, okay, we've got some good direction for drafting regulations, but I wanted to take a moment to pause and ask, is this accurate and does it reflect committee members' understanding? So I just wanted to take a moment to pause, maybe just not to show the slide and to be able to see each other for a moment. Does that seem like it's in alignment, that those priorities reflect what committee members had said and where there's alignment? Anything off? Yeah. Thank you.
Mayor Seegers, you have a question?
I just want to make a comment. I think initially when you put those in front of us, they're really black and white, right? And we know that the issue is more nuanced than that. But it actually had us really be clear about which of the 2 ends of the spectrum we lean towards, right? Knowing that, you know, as we draft the bylaws, et cetera, we may be playing in those nuanced areas, but it gave us a direction to start with. So while I didn't necessarily appreciate it or like doing it, it actually was very effective.
I appreciate that it would have been very hard. And I appreciate that you rode through it, and the responses were really helpful, and we want them to be of service to you. And it's a framework that, as you say, the reality is not black and white. Yeah. Anything else? Or if I can proceed, and I had 4 questions that I wanted to respond that had been left lingering from that December 8th meeting. I just wanted to check if I can have permission to just continue on with that and speak to those. Okay, I see some head nodding. So, okay, we'll resume the presentation. And so there are numerous regulatory tools. Here you see a suite of them that can be used and are available to local governments to manage short-term residential rentals. And on December 8th, the committee members had questions about specific tools, and namely the 4 that are in blue on the top: density caps, lawful non-conforming uses or grandfathering, business license fees, how they're calculated, and overall zoning overlay. So I wanted to just speak specifically to those 4 questions, but as you can see, they're just a small number of the many management tools that are available to local governments. And so I'll just speak to those 4 because they did have relevance as we're looking at presenting proposed regulations. So the first one was, the question was asked, how do density caps at the neighborhood level or community-wide work? How are limits set, and what are the impacts on housing values? So density caps are in select neighborhoods or an entire community that they're currently applied in very few places. So City of Montreal, Saskatoon, City of Nelson, and they're also under consideration in Prince Edward County. And the main consideration for every short-term rental residential tool is, what's the intended effect? What's the problem that this tool is trying to solve? And so I'm just going to speak to the City of Nelson as an example, because it really shows the purpose. So with this example, they use density caps to disperse the short-term rental activity throughout their community. They want to ensure that the dwelling units are used primarily for residential purposes and to allow for additional short-term rentals during the busy summer months when there's less demand for the student housing. So to do this, Nelson permits a maximum of 3 short-term rentals within 1 block. And there's an annual cap of 110 short-term rentals and licenses, and a maximum of 40 additional 4-month licenses. There's also no cap on the limit of 31-day short-term rental licenses when people go away on vacation, and that there could be those twice in a single property of a single year. So there's no data available to determine the impact on housing values, but these density caps have been coupled with robust monitoring and enforcement program, and they are regarded by the City of Nelson as being really effective in achieving their desired outcomes. So that's about the density caps, a bit of an explanation there. The next one is on lawful non-conforming uses. And during the workshop, the question was asked whether short-term residential rental businesses would be protected by grandfathering, otherwise known as lawful nonconformance. And I believe Andrew, the Director of Planning, would be the best to speak to that. Andrew, would you be able to speak to that?
Yes, thank you. No problem. 528 of the Local Government Act provides detail on non-conforming uses and non-conforming siting. So siting would be, of course, setbacks to water bodies or roads, whatnot. But it respects to land use bylaws. So most likely zoning bylaw, potentially official community plan. But it's really up to the onus of the property owner to identify a non-conformity. In most cases at local government level, we're dealing with siting, but a non-conforming use, the Peninsula Hotel that used to be located on the highway in Roberts Creek, for example, was an agricultural land reserve. So that was clearly, the use was likely permitted before any type of regulation took place. Subsequent layers of regulation changed that. But that's a land use, but I don't see that being applicable for regulatory bylaws such as business license bylaws or bylaw enforcement notice bylaws. But what it means for this particular issue with short-term rentals is if somebody has a short-term rental that's within one of the 3 zones in zoning bylaw 25 that permits a short-term rental, and they're licensed and they conform and so forth, then they would retain some sort of lawful nonconformity subject to confirmation, right? So at present, the R1, R2, and R3 zones in bylaw 25 allow short-term residential rental, but it doesn't really provide any specific within the zoning. All the specifics are within the business license bylaw. So I see that as after regulations are adopted, be it zoning bylaw 25 in those 3 zones or their successor zones in bylaw 580, they'll be permitted to carry on with that use, but the conditions of the use, which are identified separately, will apply. We will, of course, seek legal confirmation on everything prior to adoption, but that's how we see it. Basically, it's just the premise of hosting a short-term rental would be provided for in some zones, but the specifics of the regulation will be updated.
Thank you, Andrew. And the City of Victoria provides an example as well of this application, and they moved toward allowing short-term rentals in principal residences only, where the owner is in the home or on site, and except where their zoning bylaw previously permitted transient accommodation prior to zoning changes. So it's an example where business licensing for short-term rentals had in the City of Victoria just one exception due to a past zoning permitted use. So that's an example of how that applies and answering that question. Then we had a third question, 3 of 4.
Sorry, before you go on, I'm just going to interrupt. I have a question about this then. So does this mean that if we have somebody who gets a business license January 1st, because our licenses run on the fiscal year, so they get their business license January 1st to run their short-term rental, say we have, I don't know, June, I'm just picking a date. I have no idea what the time frame would be for us to actually adopt a short-term rental bylaw. We would adopt it in June. It wouldn't necessarily apply to them until they come to their renewal in January of next year. Is that correct?
That would make sense, as definitely having a rollout period, and it wouldn't start until the next calendar year. Yes.
Well, what I'm saying is they already have their license and we've licensed them for the year. So we can't then go and say, well, it's June now. Now you have to, you have to work under these new requirements.
That's right.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then the next question was about zoning overlay. And the question was, some communities have chosen to use specialty use zoning. And how does it work? So zoning is used to identify areas where the short-term residential rental use is permitted or prohibited to ensure neighborhood fit and compatibility. And short-term rentals are permitted or restricted in specific zones of the community's bylaw, zoning bylaw. And almost every community uses some form of zoning control. They can select certain residential zones where it's permitted, or commercial zones, tourist commercial zones. Some communities limit the short-term rentals to tourist commercial zones only due to their commercial nature and to mitigate concerns related to residential neighborhood compatibility and to advance the regulatory equity with tourist accommodation providers like hotels and motels. And the resort municipality of Whistler is an example where the short-term residential rentals are only in specific tourist accommodations. None are permitted in residential zones. So just wanting to check if there's any questions about that one. And then I could move on to the last. No? So the last question that we had was about the business licensing fees. And the question was, how do you calculate the right fees for operator licenses? And can the fees be collected and directed to an affordable housing reserve fund? And where has that been done? So business license fees are a tool that municipalities use where individuals or a business submits an application for a license, and then it's reviewed by staff to determine if the business is permitted to operate. And most municipalities use a business license system to manage the short-term rental programs and pay for the related costs, including the staff time, the monitoring, the enforcement costs, communication costs, rolling out the program, which can be heavier at the front end. So the fees across Canada range from $100 to over $1,500, and they depend on often on the type and the size of short-term rental, if it's principal residence or not. The fee can also vary for first-time applicants because they have higher administration requirements first time, more than renewal. The business license fees should reflect the cost of managing the short-term rental program and including all of the staff time that's associated. The short-term rental programs, to be effective, the business license should also be combined with the requirement that operators must post the license number on all online advertisements. And the enforceability of regulations is typically done with the support of a third-party compliance company like Granicus or Host Compliance. And they're the most commonly used across North America. I had asked them what that would cost. And for the District of Sechelt, that would be $16,000 a year. And that fee is based on the current number of active unique rental listings, which in the District of Sechelt is 249. And they calculate that also based with the amount of services. So I selected for a basic level of services of compliance monitoring, monthly reports, but there could be many other add-ons depending on the level of service that the community wishes to have. With respect to redirecting fees for another purpose, like affordable housing fund, there's no example of this being done elsewhere. And I believe that redirecting those fees for another purpose probably wouldn't be currently allowed. That may need to be checked further, but I do not know of that existing. Currently, the collection of the MRDT, the Municipal Regional District Tax, it's a 2% tax that's been used to fund tourism promotion. The provincial government in 2008, they introduced new rules that would allow use of those MRTD funds to be used for affordable housing, but that requires that the municipality and the Sunshine Coast government bodies discuss, prepare, present a regional tourism plan to Sunshine Coast Tourism. So that is one avenue to answer that question. And finally, another thing to note on this topic of business licenses is that regional districts don't have a business licensing authority function. And so I say that because they have to use temporary use permits that serve that purpose. And in the case of the Sunshine Coast Regional District that the District of Sechelt is surrounded by, that, and when we think about harmonizing permitting systems with neighboring jurisdictions, that's not available to the regional district, and they are using temporary use permits. So I just wanted to point that out. And that's it for the 4 questions that had been left from the December 8th meeting that seemed appropriate to answer. And I just wanted to take a moment to pause and ask if there are any other points that need to be clarified before I would go on and ask maybe another check-in.
Does anyone? Oh, Councillor McLean.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to quickly note that a proposal is working its way through the SCRD currently, which will allocate funds collected from short-term rentals to affordable housing. So how it works right now is half of that fee goes to marketing tourism promotion, and the other half of that fee collected from short-term rentals goes through the SCRD for affordable housing initiatives.
Thank you. That's in progress. That's good to know. Thank you.
Mayor Seegers, do you have a question?
I just wanted to update the committee and the community. On November 4th, it was actually passed at the regional district, at the board, to move that forward. And we should see any day now an RFP coming out for an organization to actually take on a housing coordinator position using those funds from the OAP portion of the MRDT.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah.
And then I have one further point. Like we're talking about, could those funds go to an affordable housing fund? I believe, and this would probably be for our CFO, I believe that the funds from business licenses go directly into general revenue. And if so, if we were to be able to identify how much of the funds collected would need to be used to offset costs of the short-term rental program, could we then, as a council, identify the remaining and put those into affordable housing? Is that something that we could do?
Through the chair, if I may, good question. I'm not sure I have the answer for that right now, but I think it's hard to decipher business license, you know, the extra amounts, what they would be, to then be transferred into the affordable housing reserve. However, definitely, can be utilized to cover off bylaw costs and other costs that would occur due to the short-term rentals.
Thank you.
Councillor Rowe, you have a question?
I do, Chair, thanks. I just want to make sure that I understood clearly with the ability to vary the rate of the business licenses. Did I understand correctly that they could be different for a principal residence versus a non-principal, so owner on-site versus non?
Yes, through the chair, yes, that is correct. And the proposed rental regulations that I'll be presenting next will present a tiered rate, 3 tiers based on residency. That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none, we'll let you move on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I had set aside an opportunity to collect Mentimeter, use as instead of having a chat function of if you had any, if there were any further thoughts, ideas, questions to consider going forward, that would serve as a chat function. It may or may not be needed, and I can continue to present. So maybe, Chair, what's your sense, if I may ask? There's an opportunity to provide a chat through the Mentimeter piece. The poll is now open, and it's a way for us to capture and questions, thoughts, ideas. I'm sorry, you're muted.
I'm muted. I'm so sorry.
Oh.
We want to go through the Mentimeter questions now.
There's just one open question, and it is there's a large character limit that topics or things that's maybe coming up could be entered there. So maybe I'll just pause for 2 minutes just to allow space for that. And my colleague, Catherine, would just open up the poll and allow for those to enter. Catherine?
Sure, thank you. We won't be subjecting you all to any tough either or questions, but we do just have an open question where you can put any thoughts or feedback or comments or questions that you have with the information that we've received so far. So I've got the screen here so you can see what's there, but you can, if you've got anything to add here, any thoughts or ideas, you can go back to the Mentimeter with the information, the access code that you would have received prior to this meeting. And you can just add those thoughts in there. There's a 250 character limit. So there's plenty of room to add in some questions, but you can also, once you've put something in, you can hit submit and then continue to add things in there. So we don't have to stay here. We can continue on with the presentation, but I'll leave this open so that if anything does come up or are there any ideas that you have as we're presenting, you can go ahead and put them in there.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, when I go to the Mentimeter, I get something that says neighborhood disturbances.
Well.
Okay, I will, I'll try and figure that out so that you are seeing the screen that we're seeing on the screen here.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will continue to present so with the PowerPoint on, and the Mentimeter will stay open, and Catherine will be managing that. And Catherine, please speak up if you needed me to pause, if there is something that you'd like to communicate. So when thinking about short-term rental regulations and how to draft them, I think the best analogy is toolbox, and the toolbox has 3 pouches, so to speak. One is for the regulations, where, how much, what type of accommodation or residence and parking requirements would be permitted, and that would be managed through the zoning bylaw. The next level would be some management conditions for business licensing, what their fees would be, their advertising, and the level of on-site management, and what the even safety elements of management. And that's regulated through the business license conditions, and that the license would not be issued until they met certain conditions. And the third category is compliance. So what type of enforcement would there be? How would it be monitored? And if there would be such a thing as a public registry or notification of neighbors, what is the tracking of this, and what fines are imposed, and the tool to impose fines and to list what is an infractionable item is the bylaw enforcement notice. So that's how I think about these three, setting up the toolbox, and in a way that works really well together. So the actual tools, what are the wrenches in the toolbox, I'm proposing to pull out of the 20 plus tools, that there would be 12 main wrenches used, and that there are many details to implementation of a proposed short-term rental program. And these are all elements of these 12 would be used to work well together and to achieve priority objectives. And so I have limited time to explain what each of them would be. So I'm going to try to present it in as most efficient way as possible. The question is, where does the District of Sechelt want to be in regulating short-term rentals? And next slide, please. And I want to outline a program that would add measures that would be applied, as in many other communities, that support a better fit with residential neighborhoods and protect long-term rental housing supply, the stated priorities. And so a first spot for considering that is defining the principle of what is principal residence or principal dwelling. And that's where a homeowner spends their time, that's where they get their bills, and tax forms come to this place. And it's pretty easy to prove what someone's principal residence is, and you can only have one. And so that is the unifying factor when I look at where does the District of Sechelt want to be. That's just wanted to provide that definition because that's a key piece of what I'll be presenting. The next slide, please. So the goals of the short-term rental regulations would be to encourage neighborhood fit, protect long-term rental housing supply, promote business and regulatory equity. And the way to do that would be a variety of elements, including putting a cap on the number of commercials. So different categories for where someone is a principal resident of their property and where it's in their home or on their property versus when it's not. And that's a commercial short-term residential rental, and having a cap on the commercial ones, having a requirement for on-site management, and that if there is off-site management, that there be very quick response times within 30 minutes for addressing complaints. That the proposal would also have elements of supporting many other good neighbor practices to encourage neighborhood fit. For protecting long-term rental housing supply, the proposal would have a maximum of 1 business license per property and per applicant per year. The intent is to allow homeowners to earn some revenue, but to limit the amount of commercial uses of residential homes throughout your entire community. And the owner would be permitted to have 1 residence to a short-term rental in the district, and no limits on long-term rentals. So they can have as many of those as they wish. And then for promoting business and regulatory equity, the elements of that would be limiting the total number of commercial short-term rentals in the residential zones. I'm suggesting the cap of the 10, as I mentioned, and that they be issued on a first come, first served basis, and re-examining the effect after a couple of years. Is it having the intended effect? Is it maybe too much or needs to be more? And that there be tiered business licensing fees that also reflect the highest cost being that of unhosted or commercial short-term rentals. Next slide, please. So the best way, I think, to explain it is to talk about what the proposed 3 tiers would be. That the first 2 tiers would be that using that definition of principal residence, and the last tier is commercial. So the first 2 tiers, so the first one is that it's a way of replacing the bed and breakfast definition that you currently have today, which is really an outdated definition, that there certainly can be bedrooms that are rented in a principal residence and that they use a shared kitchen or living space, and that there be no limits on the number of calendar days that this rental can occur. And that this also captures that if people go away on vacation, that they can rent their home while they're away, and that there's less of a neighborhood impact of that because that's their principal residence. They know their neighbors presumably, and that that this is the tier of that has the highest oversight because it's a principal residence. The next level that's proposed is to be a short-term rental of suites. And so this could be like a secondary suite, a basement suite within the principal residence, or a secondary building, a dwelling unit, a cottage that's on the owner's or the principal residence property. And that there be no limits on the number of days of this rental in a calendar year as well. And the last tier that's being proposed is commercial. And so this is where the property is not the owner's primary residence. I'm proposing that there be a cap of 10 on those as a start, that they be, as I mentioned, first come, first served basis, 1 license per property or per applicant per year. And that there be no limit on the number of days that that unit can be rented in a year, and not more than 6 adult guests permitted per dwelling unit. And that could be regulated through the parking, what the on-site parking requirements are. And that they have a designated responsible person that is a local resident that would be able to respond 24/7 within 30 minutes of a call should issues arise. And also that the District of Sechelt post contact information for the designated responsible hosts or owner on their website, so that there can be a much quicker time frame where people can address concerns and have that onus and the cost be on the beneficiary, being the commercial operator, not on the town staff as it is today. So last slide, there is I think that, as I mentioned earlier, it would be important to have a phase-in period of new bylaws, that they take effect 1 year from the date of the bylaws being adopted and as close as possible to the beginning of another calendar year. And just to make it, the implementation makes sense. We know that in many short-term rentals, there are repeat bookings, that especially in July and August, people say, I want to book for next July. And so there has to be some period of allowing for that to enter into the community, the regulations in a way that makes sense. And that there also should be a bylaw review period added to assess the program after a couple of years of implementation, certainly not leaving it for 16 years. There is going to need to be a check-in. Is this having the intended effect? Let's make adjustments. And that is very common in most communities. For example, Squamish, it's a 2-year period and we're just trying it out. It's good enough to try. That's really all that they're asking their community to consider. It's a very similar program, by the way, to what is being proposed. And then when I described the tiered costs, what I'm proposing at this point, just as a trying it out, is it good enough to try, that the short-term rental accessory, the first category be $250 business license per year, that the second category being the accessory unit or building on a principal residence property, that be $750 per year for the suites, and that the highest business license be $1,500 per year for the short-term residential commercial. So that's a summary of what is being proposed as a regulatory framework. Is it good enough to try? It certainly does reflect the priorities that we heard from committee members and from members of the community in the December 2020 survey. And I wanted just to switch to Mentimeter just as a way of gauging what should be the next steps. Is this good enough to try? And what would be that step? And we have a poll that would ask you that question, and then a more open poll, just two, to ask if there's any outstanding questions. I'd like to hand it over to Catherine, and then we can have, there's 20 minutes for discussion, I believe. I'll just check with the chair when that time comes. But Catherine, can you run the Mentimeter, and then we'll have an opportunity to reflect on it.
Yes. And I just want to check, when you go to the Mentimeter page now, are you seeing the screen that I have shared here?
Yes, I do.
Checking with committee members, when you're seeing it on your phone or on your desktop, are you seeing?
I don't have it working personally. The poll seems to be ended.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
If
You have to enter a new code, it says.
Right. So I can put the code up on the screen now, if that's all right. Great. Let's get it here. So there's the code, and that should take you back to the poll that we're on now.
Thank you, that worked.
Perfect. All right, so we just wanted to take a moment to do a quick poll. That was a lot of information.
Sorry, I think a couple of the councillors may not have that number. You might want to put that up again.
There we go. I'll explain what we're doing here while the remainder of you input the code, but we just wanted to take a moment to check in and see how what's being presented has really landed, and whether or not we can move forward with this, if it needs some small adjustments, and really what the next steps are. So we're just looking for direction now on how the proposal looks and where you're comfortable going from here. So I'll leave this here for a few moments.
It looks like all the councillors have that now. Thank you.
Thank you. So I see we've got 2 responses so far. There we go, they're coming in. So does this need to be adjusted with small modifications? Is it ready to draft bylaws for council consideration of first reading before going to public consultation? It looks like we've got just one more that we're waiting on.
We're 1 short today, so we're just 6.
Right.
We're good.
Great. So it looks like we've got to be adjusted with some small modifications is the majority response there. I see that no one selected other as the response, but I will go ahead and show you this page here, because this, similar to the first question that we had that we didn't get to do, this is really just an opportunity to put any of those thoughts or considerations, and we will also be opening it up to discussion, I believe, but I'm going to hand it over to Andrew now. But Andrew, I can go ahead and stop sharing the screen, and you can talk about next steps from here. And then if we did want to bring this back up on the screen to see what comments are in that second question, or to see the summary again, we can certainly do that.
Sure. I think that particular question, there was that one option of let's get on with it and draft bylaws and do some consultation. Recognizing that that's an aggressive and next step, but it was an option. One of the options was to take what we have here now, plan our stakeholder engagement, public engagement for January, and say this is what we've come up with. This is what committee of the whole or Seashell Council has endorsed us to talk about, and have that conversation and continue to build it. For the responses were minor modifications. We only gave you the option to say minor, maybe they're major, but I think I think when you look at the toolkit that's been provided and what other municipalities are doing and so forth, we're more or less on the right track. Nothing here is fixed or set, but these are our recommendations to you folks at this time. And if there are modifications recommended, then I think we need to flesh that out through discussion to give staff and our consultants some direction on how to prepare for next steps of engagement in January and beyond.
Does anyone have any questions? Mayor Seegers?
Yeah, I saw, Councilor McLean's got his hand up now. Okay. I like what's being presented. The only one that I would question would be the maximum of 10 commercial STRs. I went back and read the stuff in greater detail, and then I went to AirDNA. The numbers there aren't the same as what you have. You've indicated 249 listings, unique listings. They say 190, but in that they also say 90% of those are entire home rentals. So that's saying that in the district of Seashell, we would have, according to them, about 170 whole home rentals right now. Now, I don't know if they differentiate between whole home being like a suite, right? A separate suite versus a whole house. I don't know if they do that, but that's why I'm wondering, is 10 sufficient? And if it, would we want to have a higher number for that, for the commercial ones? And if so, then how would we indicate we'd only want a certain number maybe on a block? I mean, I know of one block in one area in the district that has 3 large commercial, STRs. So how would we limit the location of them as well? So that would be the only piece in this whole thing that I'd like some discussion around, maybe some modifications on. Other than that, I'd say we'd be in my view, we'd be ready to go, probably draft the first, bylaw, and let's get some public consultation.
Councillor McLean, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thank you. My largest concern with this right now is within the short-term rental accessory section, and that's the rental of principal residence whole home on occasion less than 90 days in a calendar year. I could see people renting out these homes for most of summer. That's when you make the money. We've seen the huge difference in the amount. And when I look at impact on a neighborhood, I don't see how this provision really helps with that, because this creates a what we're calling commercial for 90 days a year. And the other days, like maybe the owner, like we have a lot of secondary homes on the coast. So I could see them working around the rules, using these secondary homes when they're up, and then renting it out for the other 90 days, and essentially the whole time it's still a commercial, people in and out and partying. So I do have concerns with putting that section within the short-term rental accessory category.
Thank you. Councillor Toth, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. I, like the mayor, I'm not sure that 10 is the correct number either, but I do want to see us get going on this. I'm the one that said, let's send it to first, get bylaws in first reading. Is it perfect? No. Once we've got some bylaws in front of us and some tighter rules, we go out to our community associations for feedback. We can go out to our public. We can get their input. We can make changes to those bylaws. Then we can keep moving it forward. I just don't want to see the process drag out too long, like so many of our initiatives tend to do. So just some comments.
Okay, is there any other, Mayor Seegers?
Thank you. I never thought of the comment that Councillor McLean did. I mean, I was wondering how we would actually monitor the 90 days. in a, an accessory STR. I don't know how we do that, but good point in that, somebody could do June, July, and August, or July, August, and September. And yes, that gives us the same issue that we have with the large commercial STRs.
Councillor McLean, you have another question?
Yeah, so I did have some thoughts on how that could be addressed as well. And that's a shift to longer term stays. I think when we talk about impact on the neighborhood, it's the weekend rentals that are a challenge. You come up, you party for a weekend, you leave. If we can encourage week-long or month-long stays, I think the amount of partying will be a lot less, and we can still welcome people to our community and provide these opportunities to either stay for a while or fill some of those critical short-term worker accommodations, which I think is a very large need on the Sunshine Coast as well.
Thank you. Any other questions by council? Seeing none, I don't think. Oh, Councillor McLean.
There's my button. Okay. In the implementation of this, I want to take a note that Councillor Scott emailed in that it's, because he wasn't able to be here today, the opportunity to create a commercial tax class for commercial short-term rentals. So given that in Sechelt, commercial properties pay over double what a residential property pays, is there a mechanism that we can get BC assessment to trigger that? Do we have to rezone? Is it a temporary use permit, or is it simply a commercial business license on that? So what can we do to get short BC assessment to trigger the commercial rate class?
Who's going to answer this one?
If I may, Chair, I can answer that one. The example that's being tested in Squamish is to have a maximum of 30 of those that are commercial licenses that are under a temporary use permit for a maximum of 2 years. After that, they require rezoning. And that is the way to move toward a different category of assessment.
Thank you. Director Allen?
Thank you. And yes, that is correct. If one wants to formalize and make something permanent in that regard, a rezoning application would be the way to go. Respecting taxation, that's a little more complicated. It's BC assessments will provide land use classifications and codes to properties, not necessarily with consultation from local municipalities, but based on their observation. When I was briefing up and rereading the STR toolkit earlier today, I saw one of the footnotes and noting that there are at least 2, possibly 3 resolutions from UBCM to the province to encourage the province to bring in taxation for commercial rates on some short-term rentals, but they were dated 2019, 2020. So I would like to think it's in the works, but it's not certain what the province will decide in that regard. So taxation would be a little bit, or taxation rates would be a little bit beyond our control at this point, but a rezoning would be more directly in our sphere.
Thank you. So 2 questions. Mayor Seegers, I think, was first, followed by Councillor McLean. So go ahead.
So there's 2 things that I think I'd like to see us look at. One is ensuring we have cost recovery. One of the things that we want to have is enforcement of whatever we put in, and that's proactive enforcement. I think that was pretty clear from our last session. So I think that would play into how many commercial STRs we have as well, because that's where some of the funding is going to come from to cover off the costs that we're going to incur. And then another thing that I've found in some of the stuff that I read, but I didn't see it in what was proposed here, was a one-time registration fee. So particularly for the STRs, well, all of them really. I mean, if we're going to have an accessory STR, we need to know that that's a legal suite, or sorry, if it's an STR suite, we need to know it's a legal suite. Otherwise it can't be licensed. And then the other is the requirements around, safety, all of the parking, etc. So that means it's going to have staff time that has to be put into that. So we need to ensure that the registration fee is sufficient to help cover off some of those costs.
Thank you. Councillor McLean.
Yeah, so I just wanted to comment on that last Director Allen's comment about a temporary use fee being converted into a zoning bylaw change. I really like that approach. I can think of one prominent property in Tawanik that I'm sure we're all familiar with. That's a long-standing operation that may be able to receive that community support, may not, but a rezoning puts it out there to the community to have that decision. And if we put a temporary use permit for 2 years, we can kind of see if it's a 2-year test. Are they on good behavior? Do they meet all the conditions? And if so, then we can put it out to the community and potentially make it permanent. So I think that's a really good path forward for some of these commercial type operations, because within this, I'm not really seeing a formal process. I'm not a fan of the first come, first serve. I think last meeting, Councillor Scott spoke to a highest bidder type of model. So I don't know if that's the best one either, but I would like to see something based on performance. Are they impacting the neighborhood? And if not, let's pull that permit and give it to somebody else.
Thank you. Mayor Segers.
Okay, so a question about the temporary use permit and then the rezoning. If the property is rezoned, sorry, the dogs here are gone, so I'm good. If the property is rezoned, then what happens if the owner sells it to somebody else? Yes, they have to get a license, but they would, if they choose not to then have it as a commercial STR, then do they still pay the commercial taxes for the property? So it kind of locks the building into being a commercial short-term rental because of the zoning. So I don't know if that's, I don't know, that maybe we stay with temporary use permits.
Any other questions? Okay, don't see any. So how would you guys like to?
Councillor Lamb.
Sorry, Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, I just see rezoning as being, I think, a little bit over the top, because then you end up with a whole pile of spot, it's just spot zonings here and there, and exactly what you're saying. If you go to sell a property and you really don't want the STR on it, then you're stuck with a different tax ratio. The one thing that I do see with these is that these are small commercial businesses, and they're putting an extra load on infrastructure. So we have to be able to figure out some way to charge for it. So I don't have any answers, but it was just some thoughts.
Mayor Segers and Councillor McLean.
Sorry, I unmuted myself again. I noticed Victoria is the one that's got the $1,500 for the commercial short-term rentals. And I didn't see any in the documentation. I didn't see any that have anything higher than that. But given the revenue that comes from these, I don't remember if it was this time or last time, it was talking about $3,000 to $5,000 a month that they're taking in, right? On average, $3,000 to $5,000 a month. Is $1,500 sufficient as a license fee, given that the commercial ones are the ones that are typically the ones that are causing the complaints in the community?
Councillor McLean.
Yeah, I was just going to say a similar comment. I appreciate the comments by Mayor Seegers and Councillor Lamb about rezoning. I'm trying to think of other ways we can generate revenue. So the one suggested in the report is those business license fees, and I think across the board they are low. I would like to see them quite higher, because one change I would like to do is change the calculus that a property owner has to do to decide to rent it out in short-term rental. So if there are those more fees, maybe they would consider doing it a long-term rental instead. So I think with higher fees, we can help change that decision that property owners make, whether they want to rent it out, keep it vacant, or use it as short-term rental.
Thank you. Mayor Seegers, you have a question, comment?
Yes, at what point do we lay out the enforcement piece that we're going to be doing? Does that come out as part of the bylaw? Does that come out as part of the business license? Probably part of the business license. Is that correct?
Yes, through the chair, if I may respond, the three tools, the zoning changes proposed to the business license and enforcement bylaw, they would all be presented at the same time because they're part of a reinforcing package.
Okay. Good, thank you. Yeah, I didn't know if we were just going to do the bylaw, if all of them are going to be at the same time. That's really good. I like that. Thank you.
Okay, council, any other questions or comments? Councillor McLean.
Yeah, just a bigger picture question, going back to my original comment on vacation homes. So given that we are cottage country for the Lower Mainland, is there any provisions for using some of these properties as short-term rentals in this proposal? And is that something that council is interested in seeing? So these properties are typically only used on weekends, maybe a few weekends a year, maybe every weekend a year, but they do sit empty a large part of the year. Is that considered, and is that of interest to council?
Any comments?
If I could just respond that piece is not considered in these bylaws, and how homeowners choose to rent out or keep homes vacant is not considered in this suite of vacation rentals.
Thank you. Councillor Toth, you have a comment or question?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I certainly appreciate where Councillor McLean is going with that, but I don't want scope creep to happen to this. You know, we've identified a very specific problem we're looking to solve. Ultimately, if people who have short-term rentals that can't be legalized decide that they want to leave the properties empty all year round, we can't really control that either. You know, if we want to start having a conversation around vacancy and whatnot, which I think we should have, I think it needs to take place separate from this process.
Thank you. Okay, looking for any last questions or comments? Okay. I think does anyone? Oh, there's a recommendation. I don't know if anyone wants to move that or make a motion. Oh, Mayor Seegers.
Thank you. I guess I'd look to our Director of Planning Development. How much more direction do you need from us, you know, given some of the questions and comments that were raised here, to have you have the information to go with the consultants in drafting the regulations and bylaw amendments?
Well, thank you, and through the chair, I think we're pretty close on many things, and when we're down to number of commercial units or TUP versus rezoning or specific fees, to me indicates we're quite close. I think what we'll have to take stock and debrief, but what I would suggest is we'd be writing a summary of proposed regulations and using that for our engagement rather than specific bylaw amendments. right? And then we can flesh out a little bit more about the number of units or number of units per neighborhood with our community associations, with Chamber of Commerce and Tourism and other stakeholders, and have those discussions before we really specifically write the bylaw. But I think we have enough content and enough direction to massage our message a little bit and move forward here.
Thank you.
So in other words, you don't need a recommendation from us?
Pardon me, through the chair. If there's a recommendation to specifically change our approach respecting unoccupied houses or respecting the number of them or fees, anything really specific that council wants us to change our tact on, then we are certainly open for a resolution. If council thinks we're on the right track and should commence with engagement in the new year, we're happy to do that as well and continue to report back. So if there's a specific piece here, sorry to repeat, then.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Yeah. So I'm going to throw out a number and we'll see where council is on the short-term commercial. I'm looking at either 50 or 100, but I don't know, maybe 75, maybe in the middle. How many licenses do we want to look at in there? I mean, 10, I think 10 is too small, given the community and what we're up to. But where does council sit with this? What number are you looking at? Given we've probably got about 170 or 180 right now.
Council, any comments, or Councillor Toth?
Thank you, Chair. Of the ones that we've got right now, only about half of them are even interested in playing by the rules in the first place. So, you know, the numbers you throw out there, I was thinking like 30 in my own head. I'm really interested to hear what the neighborhoods have to say about it. You know, maybe it's one of those things that we say X number per neighborhood, but you know, X number across the municipality, sort of the same way that we did with the cannabis retail. Yeah, I'm interested in other thoughts too.
Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear from the community associations on this, but I wouldn't like to see it at this point anyways go above 50. I think if Squamish is looking at 30, that feels like a reasonable neighborhood, so to speak, no pun intended.
Councillor McLean.
Yeah, thank you. I think 10 is closer to what we're looking for. And the reason being is that these are the ones that cause us the most trouble. They are the ones who are taking away from viable homes. Granted, they may not be rental, but you can sell them. And they're the ones that are causing the issues in terms of neighborhood fit. So the question is, why focus on these and provide a very large number of permits for these kind of homes when they're not meeting our priorities? The two lowest ones that we ranked are providing a supplemental income and providing for tourism. That's what I believe these two meet, which are our two lowest priorities. So I think we really need to focus on the first two sections, the short-term rental accessory and the short-term rental suites. And then we have a few other ones that are left over, and that's kind of what fits into the 10.
Okay, Mayor Seegers.
Thank you. I guess where I'm going with this is I want this to be set up cost recovery and ensuring that we can have the staff that we need to support it. I mean, we will need another bylaw officer for sure. And then we've got the $16,000 a year for the software. So we're looking somewhere at $100,000. That's why I think 10 would not bring sufficient revenue in. I mean, I don't know, maybe with the suites and the accessory, maybe there would be sufficient income. So, I mean, 30, I know would give us more revenue to be able to work with as a municipality, because if we're going to put this in, we need to know we can enforce it. And we need, so the light business license piece is what is going to actually sustain that revenue source. Because we can't go to the community and say, we need you to pay for a bylaw officer to enforce a short-term rental bylaw, right? So I think 10 doesn't give us sufficient revenue, and also doesn't give us sufficient accommodation for, because we don't have hotels right now, like not sufficient hotels for what we're looking at in the community. So if we had 30, but we could space them out in the community, there wouldn't be a neighborhood impact like what we're seeing right now with the large number of them. Right. So I mean, I'd be okay with 30 and see what the community associations say about that, because along with that, it will also, you know, as they're indicating, we'll also have the bylaw enforcement piece and the business license piece, which means that, you know, the one block that has 3, they're not going to have 3. It won't happen because they won't be allowed to be there. So that's going to have a huge impact on the community. Maybe we won't have 30 then, but at least if we put it in to start, it's going to give us a transition from potentially, you know, 150 or whatever it is we have now, to, and it won't be as much to enforce then if we have the 30. I don't know, I'm willing to play with 30 at this point, at least to put it out to the community and see.
Okay, any more comments or questions?
Okay, so the other piece is the license fee. So there's 2 components that I see, the registration fee, and the other is the license fee. And the one for the STR commercial at 1,500, I think is too low. But I don't know where you'd want to go with that one.
If I may, through the chair, my initial was suggesting 3,000, and it's really not out of line with, as was indicated by Mayor Seegers, the revenues that are reflective of that.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions, Councillor McLean?
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the application fee. I look at our current structure and I think it's a disincentive to abide by the rules. The fact that you need to put up $1,000 right off the bat means that by not following the rules, you can save $1,000. So we need to get people into our system. And that is more towards the license fee rather than the application fee.
Mayor Seegers?
Thank you. I mean, yes, I want people to come into the system too, but I also recognize that if we're going to have the suites, for example, and the commercial, that means our building officials who are already really busy are going to have to take on an extra workload. And then also our licensing, people who do licensing are going to be doing more. Bylaws are going to be doing more because they're going to be looking at enforcement. So there's a upfront, you know, there's if we get the Granicus software, which is they bought host compliance, right? So if we get Granicus, right away, our bylaw enforcement people are going to have a huge workload to go out and check all of these. So I think the license fee, the registration fee, sorry, upfront, doesn't have, maybe it's tiered as well, depending on what they're applying for. But it would help cover off some of those costs up front.
Councillor Toth.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree that, you know, the licensing or the application fee needs to be modest. It needs to be manageable. You know, if you open a business anywhere in this town and you get a business license, there's a process that has to be gone through on the staff end already. You know, if it's a new space, it needs to be inspected. fire department has to come out, the whole 9 yards. And we don't charge additional application fees for businesses getting regular business licenses in the community. That's part of the cost of the business license, is being able to cover off that work within the department. So yeah, I'm all in favor of raising that $1,500 up to $2,500 or $3,000, because it does also offset the fact that we're not able to collect commercial property taxes from them. And it sort of provides a slightly more level playing field for our commercial accommodation operators that are legitimately and actively doing business in a commercial zone here in Sechelt. So I'll just leave those comments there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Toth. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? I guess Councillor Scott has just joined us. Do you have anything you would like to say? No, you're good? Perfect. So what do you think?
Okay. So I'll make a recommendation that, let's see, we move forward with the draft short-term rental accommodation regulations and bylaw amendments as presented, modifying the short-term rental commercial to a maximum of 30, and the license fee, it's a license fee, right? Business license fee for the short-term rental commercial to $3,000.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Rowe seconded. So let's see, all in favor? Or is that a question? Councillor Toth first? Okay, question first?
Sorry, Chair. Sorry to totally derail your process there. I think it's a good start. You know, we're going to see this, we're going to see the bylaw readings, and then we're going to ask our community associations for their inputs. Sunshine Coast Tourism, Chamber, whoever wants to comment on it will be able to comment on it. So I think it's a good first step, and it shows that we are continuing to move this forward in a timely manner. So I'm in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. It's been moved, it's been seconded. So I'll say all in favor. Any opposed? Councillor Lamb and Councillor McLean? Or Councillor Lamb, did you have something to say?
Yes. No, I'm in favor. I'm good.
You're in favor? So we have everyone in favor except Councillor McLean, is that correct?
Correct, and can I have that noted?
Yes, I was just going to ask that. We'd like that recorded. Thank you. Okay, so it's moved. Is there any further comments or questions? And if not, we can move on to our next item. Thank you very much, Odette, for joining us again, and Catherine. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Happy holidays. Look forward to working with you in the new year. Thank you.
Here, everyone.
Okay, excellent. So let's move on to our next item, which is 5.2, 2022 Provisional Budget. Can I get a motion to receive this report? Moved? Seconded? All in favor? Okay, excellent. And we'll turn it over to Director Douglas.
Thank you, Chair Kuster. So I've prepared a report for our committee of the whole to make several recommendations to council. And I guess I'm starting on page 15 of the agenda, where we start talking about the general operating fund and where we were at from the November 30th, December 1st, 2-day budget meetings, committee of the whole budget meetings. And at that point, we were sitting with an $803,000 deficit, which is a 7.4% increase. Plus, on top of that, we're in a program for a 3% for capital renewals, cumulative. And then through through discussions with the committee of the whole, the committee recommended a further $596,000 of new operational requests for 2022, with some of that being funded from reserves, leaving $545,344,000, adding that to the total. And so there's just a little summary there, that little table that shows where we would be if we were just to add that all into the budget and tax for that. And so if you look at the three items, the 803, the 454, and the capital contribution of 325,000, you would be looking at a 14.59% increase. Knowing that wouldn't really work well, staff took some time and reviewed some of the options available to help cover off this amount, to make the new additions and the deficit work better. And so we went through the actuals from 2021 and looked at some items in 2022, and we came up with a few items that we were recommending as amendments to either funding some of these additional items or to help offset the $803,000 deficit. So from 2021, we've identified, now these are identified savings that we will have, and so we're very comfortable making, these items, recommending them to the committee of the whole. So from wages and benefits, $200,000 in savings in 2021. Contingency, a little bit of it's been spent, so we'd have $88,000 that we can carry over. Training, although we did budget for training in a COVID world, we underspent that by $110,000. And then other counts like advertising, supplies, professional services, underspent by $143,000. Further to that, we looked through the 2022, and we're recommending a couple of revenue increases and savings. So the taxation is the new construction number of $40,000, or on the next page, so or page 16. So we budgeted for $50,000 so far for new construction. We kind of knew that was a little light, so we're suggesting that go up by $40,000 to $90,000. Building permit fees increased by another $75,000. It's very active out there, continues to be. And then other savings. This is savings like delaying the hires for the new asks by a month or two. And other little things up to $50,000. So those total adjustments come to $706,300, and which is a 6.51% savings. And then the next table that we show here is just inserting those savings into the above table, which the end result would be a 5.08% increase for operations, and then the 3% for capital, which would result in a 8.08% tax increase. And then the next table is under the 2022 General Operating Fund Provisional Budget. Is just a reconciliation of those recommendations, showing the savings and then the net tax for operations of 508, which would leave a zero surplus deficit, and then the addition of 3% for the cumulative tax for capital. any questions on that so far?
Councillor Toth?
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the 2021 identified savings on the bottom of page 15 there, are these one-time savings, cash that we didn't spend in 2021?
Correct,
So would that mean it would be an extra 5% increase in 2023 to compensate?
For the most part, I will say yes. The contingency is one that could play a part in the future, but for the most part, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McLean?
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question to Councillor Toth. So in effect, what we're doing here is transferring some of the increase to next year potentially, unless we're able to find similar savings again. I think the wages and benefits is a good example. We had a couple empty positions, we saved money. We might be able to do that again next year, but it's hard to tell at this point.
Yes, correct. Yeah. I mean, there's two ways of thinking of it. You've already taxed for the 2021 identified savings and you didn't spend it. So it either can go forward and help fund 2022, or you're going to put it into surplus or into a different reserve, or, so, yeah, there's a couple of different ways to think about it.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions? Councillor McLean, you have another question?
Yep, thank you. Just on the contingency, could I just get another explanation on that? Because I'm not sure if right now, let me rephrase, is that a assumption of less risk in the next year? Because I think we're still in a risky period in terms of economy and all that. Or is there another reason that we're reducing our contingency?
So in our general operating fund, we have a $100,000 contingency that isn't spent unless we have something come forward. And so there's remaining 88,000. So we can just bring it forward to cover the 2022 contingency, because, and then there'll still be $100,000 in the 2022 budget for contingency in the general operating fund.
Perfect. I didn't realize that was continuation, transfer to and from surplus. Yeah.
Yep.
Councillor Lamb, you have a
Yeah.
question?
Sorry. So I can just clarify. So the contingency we would carry over directly, but the other items we'd let go through to surplus and then fund it from surplus. And I just want to make that known because it's the cleanest way for us to do it from an accounting perspective. We're looking at, let's just say, 55 or 60 accounts, and so it's a lot easier for us to let it flow to a surplus and then say we're going to fund operations from surplus next year versus carrying over each one of those items, right?
Thank you. Councillor Lamb has his hands up for a question.
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering, I realize that we're still trying to put, trying to get our reserves in line to where they should be and put money aside for our infrastructure. But we've had a pretty, we've had a banner year this year, and it looks like 2022 should be another exceptional year. So I'm just kind of wondering, I'm just wondering, what does it take to get, to get our property tax increases down to a cost of living allowance or a zero? I mean, I'm just really struggling because it's impossible to keep going at 8% or 10% or, we have to make some major changes if that's what we think we're going to keep doing.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. Is there any other questions? Comments? No? Oh, Mayor Seegers?
Thank you. I understand where Councillor Lamb's coming from. You know, it's a continual cost to the community. And I think if we want to look at having the increase be equal to the cost of living increase, we need to look at what services we're going to cut. That's not a conversation that we've had. Part of what we're doing right now with the staff is quantifying what those services are that we are providing to the community. And I think we're not there yet, but I think we will get to a place where we can say, this is what this service costs us. If you don't want it, we can cut it. This is the cost. We don't have that information now to be able to do that. And it is a conversation that we've had at this table a number of times. Like, how do we know what the individual things cost us so that we can be clear about those to the community?
Councillor Toss.
Thank you, Chair. You know, we know that the property taxes have been artificially low, inadequate, you know, underfunded, whatever you want to call it, for decades. There is a lot of catch up that's involved. There are certainly cheaper places to live in Canada. There are certainly more expensive places to live in Canada. You know, I do struggle with this as well. I also look at the fact that Seashelt is sort of making a step from where it is now to you know, a next bigger municipality, a bigger place. You know, we're going through a growth cycle. I hate to use the word city, but we are moving up in scale. And there are staff, there's requirements, there's processes that need to change. You know, gone are the days when Seashelt had one employee who worked out of an office with a big stack of paper. You know, we are moving to the next stage of you know, bigger municipality. I am, you know, a little hesitant to burden the next council that sits here with a 8% increase as their starting point, based on, you know, 5% deferred and another 3% for capital. But, you know, this isn't a final version. This is just sort of the next iteration, and we'll see what comes next in January, I guess.
Councillor Lamb, do you have a follow-up question? Your hand's up.
Yeah, I just one of the things just wanted to make a comment about is the this process that we worked on for the first hour here today, the STR. You know, that's a start of you know, bringing extra revenues in from you know, from a piece of our community that does at this moment doesn't contribute, but actually they take a lot of there's a lot of demand on the infrastructure that we have here. So it's a start, and it's just making each one pay. I mean, and it's $30,000-$40,000 a year from each, you know, from a couple of different groups. All of a sudden, that's a 1%, you know, cut to our taxes. So it is struggling to find these pieces, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Seegers.
I think another piece that we've been focusing on is industrial. So, for example, the airport master plan, you know, that we've identified as moving forward in here. If that moves forward, we can increase our industrial base. You know, those kinds of things are long range, but will also address the burden that's on the residential tax base. So those are bits and pieces as well that, yes, there's a cost now, and we're hoping that those down the road will help mitigate some of that for our residents.
Thank you. Any other comments from council? Oh.
I got one other one. Yeah, just wanted to comment that our industrial and commercial percentage is very low in the community, and it looks like there is a potential. And when you get an industrial property that pays 3 times the residential rate, it definitely impacts. If we moved to even from going from 8 to 12% of our tax income was industrial commercial rate, it would make a tremendous difference. So there you go.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe, are you waving to speak?
Sure. Just to echo Councillor Lamb, because that's what I've been sitting here thinking, as long as the residential taxpayer is responsible for 85% of our budget, things are never going to be jolly come tax time. And the community needs to be open to that conversation about industry and commercial enterprises, because that's one of the ways that we're going to be able to get within what UBCM would call best practices for a municipality, is not 85% of residential taxpayers supporting the tax base. So that hasn't happened. Looking at our infrastructure hasn't happened. We did not inherit a dowry. And I'm sorry, we don't love this. If anyone thinks we love this, we don't. I got to pay taxes too. And we have to take care of business. We don't know what's going on under our roads, even as far as infrastructure goes. And we're trying to be a bit proactive. We're trying to put a team together that works for the district of Sechelt. We want this to be a place where people want to work, so that we don't have positions that go empty. There's all sorts of things that we are trying to do to benefit the community, and none of it is free. Is a 0% tax increase in this day and age even realistic without cutting services? And to Mayor Seeger's point, that's a huge conversation we need to have. And I want people to think about that the next time they're walking down beach accesses and in our beautiful parks and all of that. So if anybody out there on Facebook or social media or in the Clayton's parking lot, let's see, where did I get talked to the other day? The Daily Roast, if they think we love this, it's not true, but we're trying to take care of business. And unfortunately, that comes at a cost.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Councillor McLean.
Yeah, I think Councillor Rowe said it pretty well, so thank you for that, Councillor Rowe. I view our positions as council, we're the stewards of this community for 4, 8, 12, whatever years we are here. Our role is to take what we were given and leave it in a better place. And I think that's what we're doing in this budget. We are, one of our largest costs at the District of Sechelt is staffing. And we need that staffing in order to leave our municipality in a better place. We've looked at the challenges that we face in Sechelt, and at the end of the day, we need to work to address them. And how we do that is we have great employees who deal with those issues, propose solutions to council to decide on. There's a tremendous amount of responsibility that lays on the municipality. And there's huge expectations for what a municipality delivers and takes care of. And I think what this budget does is really helps us as stewards for this council term leave it better for the next one, leave it better for 10 years, 50 years down the road. And that's really all that we can do, is just try and think about that long-term future of our community. And how are we going to get better? We're going to do what we can, do the planning work, do the finance work, do the engineering work. It all comes together. Everyone here is here to make Sechelt a better place in the long term. So, I think this is a good approach forward.
Thank you, Councillor McLean. Is there any other comments or questions? Okay. We are Director Douglas, have you finished everything on your report that you need to go over? No. Do you want to continue on the next little bit then?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So we're on page 17, sewer operations. When we presented at the meeting on the 30th and 1st, there was an error in capital funding. We had a project that was listed there, which is the improvements to the Outfall. And we had it listed as a DCC project, and it actually is not a DCC project. So for us to do that, we would find the funding would have to come from the capital reserve, the sewer capital reserve. And so you'll see, firstly, there's a new number here for what we would need for capital. I think the last report we talked about, it was $33,000 short, but it's actually $133 because of the change in funding. So once again, a table here just goes through where we were at. We had a $543,000 surplus, which goes into the capital reserve, and we have planned capital that's a little bit more than that, $694,000, and which then leaves a bit of a shortfall of $133,000 to fund capital property. And so just going through and doing the math, a 6.2% increase to user fees would cover that and leave a small surplus in the end in the reserve of $1,603. Any questions on that one?
Mayor Seegers?
Thank you. That's pretty close to the wire. If something was to happen to the, some other capital requirement through the year, where would you get the money from?
Yeah, they would. There's definitely close to the wire. There is a small contingency in the sewer fund. I think it's around $50,000. But yes, you're correct. I'm trying to, balance the user fees / requirements for cash to not be overly a burden to the community.
Thank you. Any other follow-up to Director Douglas's comments? Okay, well, you can continue. Oh, sorry, Councillor Toth.
Thank you, Chair. I guess in follow-up to the mayor's comments and with the change there in the funding reserve being left rather barren, is 6.2% appropriate? Or on the flip side of that, is there a capital project within the sewer list that we might be able to defer to 2023? Maybe we keep the increase at 6% to help build up those reserves in the future years. But I guess I'll be going back and having a look at the sewer capital items again. It would be a lot more ideal to leave more money in that capital reserve than is what is being proposed here right now.
Thank you, Councillor Toth. And does anyone else have a follow-up question?
If I may, through the chair, I just want to remind council there's about $400,000 left in surplus right now. That would be for urgent matters. And we are pretty confident they'll be added to that this year from the 400. So if there was a really urgent matter, there is that sum of money that could be utilized, and that's essentially what it's for. Is for an emergency item, right?
Thank you. Okay, Councillor McLean, question.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this during the budget process, but we kind of have two different approaches for dealing with capital. On the primary side, the District of Sechelt wide side, we set a goal, we increase it by 3%, and then we budget the projects that we think can fit within that amount. On the sewer side, we're still in emergency mode. We're essentially listing all the projects that we need to do and then funding those projects. So we're still not getting ahead on the sewer side, like we're very slowly doing on the operation, on the main side. So I'm not looking to make a change, but that is something that I want to reiterate, that we need to get better at funding our sewer capital side. And I'm hoping that we can keep an ongoing effort towards that over the next few years.
Thank you, Councillor McLean. Any further comments or questions on this topic? No? Okay, Director Douglas, let's move on.
Septage operations, once again, it covers costs, but it's definitely not in a sustainable position. We really feel we need to take some time to figure out, the rates we're charging versus what kind of usage we're getting there, and to see if we can identify some trending. But, like I said, it's very cyclical there, and, it's something we do need to get a handle on in the near future.
Councillor McLean, you have your hand up?
Yep, thank you. So given that we are increasing the sewer user fees, is there a user fee or something similar charged to the septage function? And is that amount increasing proportionately? It isn't. Last year we doubled the fees, and so they went up substantially. We also know that from a septage receiving place, we are fairly high in as a charge rate at this point, to the point where some of the haulers are trying to figure out what they can do personally to, look at mitigating the costs that, they see are to them. But I mean, they shouldn't see it to them, but they see that as being, substantial. And, they're 2 to 3 are looking at ways and means to find a more cost-effective way for septage to be dealt with.
Councillor Scott?
As someone who runs on a septic tank, I can tell you that I pay way less over a year as compared to our sewer costs. And I have no problem paying my fair share in relation to that. And as far as I'm concerned, if the septage haulers can take it on themselves and it's not the district of Sechelles' liability for the entire lower Sunshine Coast, have at it. So I'd say let's put an increase on it.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor Toth, question, comment?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I too am on septic, so I totally understand where Councillor Scott's coming from. We could double the fees again. And if you've got a healthy, functional septic system, it really shouldn't make that big of a difference to you between your pump out periods. If we've got the haulers that are looking at other options, I'm wondering if this is even a facility that we need to be continuing to run. I'm not prepared to make any motions or, ask any really tough questions right now about that, but maybe in January I'll poke that bear a little bit, because if the haulers are looking to do something else, we have no reason, we're not obligated to be in this business, septage receiving. There's no provincial requirements for the District of Sechelles to take this on. As far as I'm aware, it's a legacy agreement that came through the SCRD back in the day. And if the service is no longer required, then there's no reason to offer it.
Thank you, Councillor Toth. Mayor Seegers.
It sounds like there's some appetite to potentially increase the septage fees. I have no idea to what, but sounds like there's some appetite to do that.
Okay, let's do, not that, I mean, are we looking at something like 10%, or do you think we're looking at something like 25% or?
Councillor Scott?
I think there's no reason why we can't, at a minimum, put a matching increase on. If we're going to hit the sewer users with 6.2%, do the same for the septage. I mean, yeah, we doubled it last year. Now we're finally at a position where maybe we aren't in the hole. You're saying we're still in the hole, but at a minimum 6.2, it should match whatever the sewer users have to pay.
Okay.
Mayor Seegers?
Thank you. I think to Councillor McLean's comment before, in the sewer and the septage, we are not in a proactive position. We do know that our septage receiving facility is going to need a complete overhaul in the next, number of years, and we don't have any money to do that. We don't even have any money to do the planning for that. So, somewhere we can't go to the general public to ask for additional revenue to do that. We need to raise that from those who are using the service.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll let you continue, Director Douglas. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm wondering if I should get a motion to increase the fees in the 5-year financial plan going forward, 2022, 6.2%.
I'll make that recommendation.
Seconded. Perfect. All in favor?
Hang on one second. Is that it's for the septage, correct? We want that in the recommendation as well? Okay.
Yes, because my report shows a 0 increase, so if the direction from the committee would then to build in a 6.2% to septage.
Okay. I think that's the recommendation on the floor then. Thank you.
Perfect. So it's been moved and seconded, so we'll just look for all in favor of this increase. And any opposed? None opposed. Perfect. So it's passed. There we go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Then we're on page 17 now, where we're looking at some tax samples. We have 3 residences there, what it would look like in with the 8.08% increase and the 6.2% increase. The first one's an apartment, overall. Apartments in the past, then this is, I've kind of showed this a little bit differently for the apartment one. That apartments in the past haven't ever paid garbage fees to the district. They've had to hire a separate hauler to take care of their garbage. So this year will be a year that changes, where they'll actually be paying the district, and we'll be providing basically the services through the contractor. And so the apartment one shows a little funny. It shows the $309 increase, but that's not all taxation. That's just that service change that we're going to be doing this year. And so if you eliminate that, an apartment would pay about 5.6% more for just the taxation and the sewer user fees on average. And that would be $66 versus the $309 that I show there. And then the next one would be an average home from 2021, based, valued at $638,000. You're looking at a 7.2% overall increase, $195. I was asked today, what would 1% be on an average home, and I think I said that it was $1,635 for 1%. So, and then a little bit more expensive house here, $979,000 value, 7.4% tax increase or total increase for municipal services, or $266, and that's for the the 3 increases: garbage, taxes and sewer. And then we go to commercial, which will show a little bit higher. Commercial value at $685, $333 for taxes. We don't do commercial garbage, and then $76 for user fees. So $409 or 7.3%. And then a little bit higher valued one at $979, 7.5% overall, $552 for commercial property. So the next steps for us would be if council is or committee of the whole recommends what we've discussed today to council, then we would be building the 2022 provisional budget based on the recommendations, and then the 5-year financial plan would be based off of that, and we would be able to come back with our 5-year financial plan. I'm going to say fairly quickly, except we are waiting for the adjustments to year end for the carryover projects and accruals. So, our process laid out to try to get to third reading, but we would get to third reading without those accruals and the carryovers. So then we would amend it to include them, and then we would have the final version of the 5-year financial plan. So I'm kind of recommending that we wait for the year-end process to play out so we know what the accruals will be. We'll build the budget based on all the recommendations to date. And the next time you would see the 5-year financial plan, it would be completed with all the accruals, all the carryover projects, really a complete package. And the other thing we have to wait for would be the BC assessment information so that we can, we will be very accurate on that. So, essentially, the budget process would continue likely in March with the presentation of the 5-year financial plan based on everything accumulated together.
Perfect, thank you. So I have 3 hands up. I think I saw Councillor McLean's first, so we'll go with you. No, you don't have your hand, don't have a question? Councillor Toth then.
I was first, Chair. However, Director Douglas answered my question in his very last couple sentences there. We're not, these numbers that we've got presented here sort of as example properties on page 18 and 19, they're not reflective of changes in assessments or shifts in the assessment classes. Those become available to us in January sometime?
No, we get the kind of the first cut in January, but the one that we lay the taxes off of doesn't come until usually February, March.
Thank you.
It's called the completed roll, and it comes after. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Councillor McLean, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to do a little bit of a math exercise to compare this to what renters may face. So if you're looking at a $2,000 rental per month, it's going to cost you $24,000 per year. And this year, the BC government has said that you can increase your rent by 1.5%. So what that generates is another $360 per year. That is less than the $195 we're proposing for the typical, or that's more than what we're proposing for the typical home at $195. So yes, SCRD taxes will be added on in there, but it's in line. So this 1.5% increase that renters would face is somewhere in the range of what we're looking at with 7.2 when you do all the math. So there is an expectation that costs do go up over time. And I think that 7.2% just represents how little of overall housing costs that the municipal government takes.
Okay, Councillor Lamb, you are up next.
There you go. Yeah, I just wanted to make the comment that this is just the District of Sechelt portion of your taxes. There's also the SCRD and fire department and school tax and all that. So keeping that on the table. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other comments or questions before we move on? Okay, perfect. Director Douglas.
So then there's additional information there, just kind of combines the things we've talked about through the budget process. There's the addition items, removing the items that council deleted, capital, same, and then just an updated reserve balances. Included in my report, I have a number of resolutions that staff would like to be considered. Essentially giving us pre-approval to be starting to work on all these items that have been approved through to date, basically.
Mayor Seegers.
Thank you. If I look at the recommendations on page 14, then number 3 talks about the sewer operating fund provisional budget. So we made that recommendation about increasing 6.2. So that would replace the one that's here, this recommendation?
Or you can amend or change this motion to so that one's a standalone motion.
Okay.
That would be incorporated. So you would maybe take out not as the presented, you could take that out and just say, with the added increase for septage rate.
Okay, and then number 5 in here, you're requesting early approval be given to the 2022 capital projects. So that's that staff can start moving forward with those right away?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, does anyone want to make a motion? Are you done your presentation, Director Douglas, or you have more to go through?
No, yeah, I'm done.
So how would you
Kuster.
like to proceed? Any volunteers or? No one's. Oh, perfect. Councillor Rowe.
I'll make a motion that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council that the planned approach to balance the 2022 operating fund provisional budget be approved as presented, and that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council that the planned approach to balance the 2002 sewer operating fund provisional budget to include a
probably be approved, including a 6 point
increase to the septage fee. And that the Committee of the Whole recommend the Council that the additional operating costs for the 2022 be approved as presented, and that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council that early approval be given to the 2022 capital projects as presented.
Was that a second, Mayor Seegers, or a question? Okay, seconded. Councillor Toth, was that a question or you were? Okay, perfect. So we have a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? No, motion passed. Excellent. And I think that is it for our agenda. Let me just go back up here quickly. Yeah. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved, seconded, all in favor?